The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Jake Morrison rode his horse across the desert landscape near his ranch. At 30, he'd spent most of his adult life working this harsh but beautiful land, his dark hair hidden beneath a weathered cowboy hat, leather vest worn from years of hard work. The saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels against the blazing sky, their arms reaching toward the cloudless expanse. Jake's ranch sat on the edge of Navajo Nation territory, where ancient traditions met modern ranching life. As he rounded a rocky outcrop, Jake spotted something unusual, a horse wandering riderless near a cluster of prickly pear cacti. His trained eye immediately scanned the area for signs of trouble. That's when he saw her, a young Navajo woman, maybe 19 or 20, lying motionless beside a boulder. Her traditional clothing was torn and dusty, dark hair spread across the red dirt like spilled ink. "Easy, girl," Jake murmured, dismounting carefully. The woman stirred as he approached, her eyes fluttering open, dark, frightened but alert. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. "Please," she whispered in accented English, trying to sit up. "Help me." Jake knelt beside her, his experienced hands checking for serious injuries. "Don't move too much. Looks like you took a bad fall. What's your name?" "Aiyana," she said, wincing as she shifted. Her horse accident had left her vulnerable in the unforgiving desert, miles from the nearest help. "I'm Jake. My ranch isn't far. Can you ride if I help you?" He studied her face, noting the fear that seemed deeper than physical pain, as if she was running from something more dangerous than a spook horse. Aiyana nodded shakily. I can't go back there. Please, don't take me back to the reservation." Jake's brow furrowed. Something in her voice told him this wasn't just about medical attention. "We'll get you patched up first. Then we'll figure out the rest." As Jake helped Aiyana onto his horse, sharing the saddle, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet ranching life was about to change dramatically. The weight of her against his back as they rode toward his homestead felt like carrying someone's entire world, and all the troubles that came with it. Jake's ranch house appeared to the desert haze, a modest adobe structure with a wraparound porch, built to withstand the harsh Arizona climate. The setting sun painted the mountains purple and orange, casting long shadows across the yard where his few cattle grazed near a precious water source. Aiyana remained silent during the 20-minute ride, her grip on Jake's vest the only sign she was conscious. "Easy now," Jake said, helping her down. Her legs buckled slightly, and he caught her elbow. "Guest rooms through here. Haven't had visitors in months." The interior was Spartan but clean, heavy wooden furniture, Native American rugs on polished floors, and photographs of the land spanning decades. Aiyana's eyes lingered on a collection of arrowheads displayed in a glass case, her expression unreadable. Jake settled her on the bed, then retrieved his first aid kit from a bathroom. "This might sting," he warned, cleaning the head wound. Aiyana bit her lip, but didn't cry out, impressing him with her stoicism. Her arm wasn't broken, just badly bruised. "You hungry?" he asked, wrapping her arm in an elastic bandage. "Got some soup warming on the stove." Aiyana shook her head, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Just need to rest." "Thank you, Jake." She pronounced his name carefully, as if testing its weight. "Bathrooms across the hall. Holler if you need anything." Jake paused at the doorway. "That accident, was someone chasing you?" Her dark eyes met his briefly before looking away. "It's complicated." Jake nodded, recognizing the wall she'd thrown up. Most things worth running from usually are. Get some sleep. Morning might bring better answers. As he closed the door, Jake heard the soft sound of crying from within. He stood there for a moment, hand on the doorknob, then walked away. Some wounds needed time before they could be properly tended, and he sensed Aiyana carried plenty of both kinds. The desert night sailed around the ranch with familiar sounds, coyotes calling in the distance, wind to mesquite trees, and the constant whisper of sand against glass. Jake sat on his porch, drinking coffee and wondering what morning would bring. Jake woke to an aroma he hadn't experienced in his kitchen for years, something rich and complex, with hints of corn and chili. He'd expected to find Aiyana still sleeping off her injuries, but instead discovered her moving confidently around his stove, her injured arm held carefully at her side. She'd braided her long dark hair and somehow cleaned the dust from her traditional skirt and blouse. "Morning," he said cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Aiyana stirred something in his largest pot, steam rising with an incredible smell. "I found cornmeal and dried chilies in your pantry. Hope you don't mind." Jake stared. His pantry had been nearly bare except for basic staples. Yet somehow she created what looked like a feast. Mind? Hell, I can't remember the last time this place smelled like home cooking. "What is that?" "Corn mush with chilies and wild onions. I gathered the onions from near your water tank this morning." She ladled the mixture into 2 bowls, adding strips of what looked like jerky she'd somehow rehydrated. "You've been up and around already?" Jake accepted the bowl, genuinely concerned. "You took a hard fall yesterday." Aiyana's cheeks colored slightly. "I heal quickly, and I wanted to contribute something. You've shown me kindness." The first bite made Jake's eyes widen. The flavors were unlike anything he'd tasted. Earthy, spicy, with a depth that spoke of generations of refinement. "This is incredible. Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother." Aiyana's voice grew soft. "She taught me that food is medicine, comfort, and connection all at once." They ate in comfortable silence as the Arizona sunrise painted the kitchen walls gold. Jake found himself stealing glances at this mysterious woman who'd appeared injured and afraid, only to transform his stark bachelor quarters into something that felt like home. "Aiyana," he said finally, "I don't mean to pry, but yesterday you seemed pretty spooked about going back to the reservation. And now you're cooking like you plan to stay a while." Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Would that be problematic? The question hung in the desert air between them, loaded with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. 3 days passed in an unusual rhythm. Aiyana proved remarkably capable despite her injuries, tending Jake's small vegetable garden with knowledge that transformed struggling plants into thriving ones. She'd somehow coaxed green beans and squash from soil Jake had nearly given up on, and found edible plants in the desert that he'd walked past for years. "Water's the secret," she explained, showing him how to create small shade barriers. "The plants tell you what they need if you know how to listen." Jake was learning that Aiyana had many such skills, mending torn fabric with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, preparing medicines from desert plants, and cooking meals that made his simple ingredients taste like restaurant fare. More puzzling was how naturally she fit into his daily routines, as if she'd always belonged there. The illusion of peace shattered when dust clouds appeared on the horizon that 4th morning. Jake grabbed his binoculars from the kitchen window, his stomach dropping as he identified the vehicles approaching fast. 3 trucks, he said grimly. Navajo Nation plates. Aiyana went rigid beside him, her face draining of color. "They found me. Family. My uncle and—" She swallowed hard. "The man I was supposed to marry. Thomas Begay. He's respected in our community, older, with strong traditional views about women's roles." Jake studied the determined set of her jaw. "And you have different ideas about your role. I want to finish college, become a teacher, maybe live in both worlds instead of just one." She looked at him desperately. "Thomas believes education corrupts women, makes them forget their place." The trucks were close enough now that Jake could see faces through the windshields, hard, angry faces of men who'd traveled far to retrieve what they considered their property. "Your choice," Jake said quietly. "I can tell them you moved on, or you can face this head on. Either way, you're not going anywhere you don't want to go." Aiyana stared at him in surprise. In her world, men made decisions for women. You'd lie to them? For me, I do what's right. Question is, what do you think that is? The trucks pulled into his yard, engines cutting as dust settled around them. Through the window, they could see 5 men emerging, led by an older Navajo man in traditional clothing, and a younger one whose expensive boots and silver jewelry marked him as someone accustomed to getting his way. Aiyana took a deep breath. "I'll face them, but stay close." Jake nodded, checking that his rifle was within easy reach. "Right beside you." The 5 men approached Jake's porch with the confidence of those accustomed to being obeyed. The older man, clearly Aiyana's uncle based on her shared cheekbones and determined expression, spoke first in rapid Navajo. Aiyana responded in the same language, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "We'll speak English," interrupted the younger man, Thomas Begay. He was perhaps 35, with intelligent eyes and an expensive watch that caught the morning sunlight, out of respect for our host. Jake stepped forward, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Jake Morrison, this is my land." "Henry Yazzie," the older man replied with a slight nod. "This is my niece, Aiyana. She's been missing for 4 days. Her family has been very worried." "I can see that," Jake said carefully. "She had a riding accident. Been recovering here." Thomas stepped closer to Aiyana, his voice carrying the authority of a man, and used defiance. "Enough games, Aiyana. Your wedding is in 3 days. The entire community is expecting you. You've embarrassed me and your family long enough." "I told you before I left," Aiyana said, lifting her chin. "I won't marry someone who wants to cage my mind along with my body. Education has poisoned your thinking," Thomas snapped. "A woman's strength comes from supporting her husband and raising strong children, not from filling her head with white man's ideas." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Seems like the lady's made her position pretty clear. Thomas turned cold eyes on him. "This is a family matter, rancher, Navajo business. It doesn't concern you. It concerns me when it happens on my land." Jake's voice carried a warning edge. "And when someone asks for my help." Henry stepped between them, recognizing the rising tension. "Aiyana, you are my brother's daughter. Your mother died trusting me to guide you toward a good life. Thomas is a successful man, respected in our community. You could have a secure future." "As what?" Aiyana's voice rose. "A decoration for his house? Someone to cook and clean and never speak her own thoughts." As a woman fulfilling her proper role, Thomas said firmly, "These modern ideas lead only to unhappiness and broken families." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Jake could see the pain in Aiyana's eyes, torn between love for her family and her own dreams. Her uncle's face showed genuine concern beneath his stern expression, while Thomas radiated the frustration of a man whose authority had been challenged publicly. "I need time to think," Aiyana said finally. "You've had 4 days to think," Thomas replied sharply. "Time for this nonsense to end." The tension on Jake's porch could have been cut with a knife. Henry Yazzie's weathered face showed the strain of a man caught between family duty and his niece's obvious distress. The 3 other Navajo men remained silent but alert, their positions forming a subtle circle that could quickly become threatening. "Let me ask you something, Thomas," Jake said, surprising everyone by addressing the younger man directly. "If Aiyana was your daughter instead of your intended wife, would you want her to have choices?" Thomas's eyes flashed. "If she was my daughter, she would have been raised properly to understand her place in the sacred balance of things. Women who reach too far upset the harmony of the community. And what if that community's harmony depends on keeping half its people silent?" Jake shot back. Henry raised a hand before Thomas could respond. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your concern for my niece, but you don't understand our ways. Among the dying, marriage is not just between 2 people. It joins families, creates alliances, maintains traditions that have sustained us for centuries." Aiyana stepped forward, her voice carrying both respect and steel. "Uncle, those same traditions once honored women's voices in tribal decisions. Grandmother told me stories of women leaders, women who spoke in council, women who chose their own paths." "Your grandmother lived in different times," Henry said sadly. "The world has become more dangerous for our people. We must hold tighter to what keeps us strong. Or maybe," Aiyana replied, "we need to remember what made us strong in the first place." Thomas moved closer, his patience clearly exhausted. "Enough philosophy. Aiyana, you will return with us today. The wedding preparations are already made. The medicine man is waiting. Families have traveled from across the reservation. And if I refuse, then you shame not just yourself, but your clan, your family, and everyone who supported you," Thomas said harshly. "You become dead to us." The words hit Aiyana like a physical blow. Jake saw her stagger slightly and instinctively moved closer to her side. "That's quite a choice you're offering," Jake said grimly. "Submit or be disowned." "It's the choice she's always had," Thomas replied coldly. "The choice every woman has, to honor her family or become selfishly lost in individual desires." Henry looked pained by his companion's harsh words, but didn't contradict them. The cultural chasm between Jake's world of individual freedom and the Navajo emphasis on community, responsibility, seemed impossible to bridge. "I need until sunset," Aiyana said quietly, "to decide." Thomas started to object, but Henry nodded slowly. "Sunset. But know this, child, some choices cannot be undone." After the Navajo men retreated to their trucks to wait, Jake and Aiyana sat on his porch in heavy silence. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, creating shimmering heat waves that made the desert landscape dance like a mirage. In the distance, the visiting men could be seen talking intensely among themselves, their gestures suggesting heated debate. "Tell me about your grandmother," Jake said finally. Aiyana's expression softened. She was magnificent, small in body but enormous in spirit. She knew every plant that could heal, every story that could teach, every song that could comfort. When the government tried to take children to boarding schools, she had 3 of them in the desert for an entire winter, keeping them alive with traditional knowledge. "Sounds like she'd understand your desire for education. She's the one who encouraged it." Aiyana's voice grew wistful. She said knowledge was like water. It finds its own level, flows where it's needed most. But she also taught me that we're connected to our people like roots to soil. Cut the roots, and the plant dies, Jake finished. "But what if the soil's poisoned? Then you find new soil or you heal the old." She looked at it with eyes that seemed far older than her 20 years. "Thomas isn't evil, you know. He genuinely believes he's protecting something sacred. In his worldview, women who assert independence weaken the fabric that holds everything together." Jake considered this. "And in your worldview, women who can't speak their truth weaken it even more." Aiyana stood and walked the porch railing, gazing out at the endless expanse of desert. "My grandmother used to say that traditions are like rivers. They must flow to stay alive. When they become stagnant pools, they poison everything around them." What would she tell you to do now? Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. She'd tell me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. But she'd also remind me that sometimes the most courageous thing is knowing when to bend so you don't break. And which is this? I don't know. Tears started down her cheeks. "If I go back, I lose myself. If I stay, I lose my family, my community, everything I've ever known. How do you choose between your soul and your roots?" Jake moved beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but careful not to impose. Maybe the question isn't about choosing between them. Maybe it's about finding a way to honor both. How? I don't know yet, but we've got until sunset to figure it out. In the distance, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. More vehicles approaching. Jake reached for his binoculars, his heart sinking as he counted at least 6 more trucks heading their way. "Looks like word's gotten out," he said grimly. "Your family's bringing reinforcements." By late afternoon, Jake's quiet ranch had transformed into an impromptu meeting ground. 12 vehicles surrounded his house, their occupants creating distinct groups across his yard. Family members, tribal elders, concerned community members, and several young Navajo women who watched Aiyana with expressions ranging from sympathy to disapproval. Henry Yazzie had assumed the role of informal mediator, his authoritative presence keeping conversations civil despite rising tensions. Thomas Begay stood with a group of older men, their traditional dress and stern expressions making clear their position on the matter. "This has gotten out of hand," Jake muttered, watching the crowd from his kitchen window. "It was always going to," Aiyana replied sadly. "Individual choices don't exist in a vacuum in tribal communities. What I do affects everyone, sets precedents, challenges beliefs, forces people to examine their own commitments." An elderly woman approached the porch, clearly someone of importance based on how others deferred to her presence. Her silver hair was traditionally braided, and turquoise jewelry adorned her weathered hands. "Grandmother Spider," Aiyana breathed, using a respectful term for female elders. The woman's voice carried the authority of decades when she spoke in English, clearly intending for Jake to understand. Child, I am Maria Tso. I knew your grandmother well. She was my cousin and my friend. Aiyana stepped forward respectfully. Mrs. Tso, grandmother always spoke of your wisdom. Your grandmother was proud of your mind, your questions, your hunger for knowledge. She was also proud of your connection to our people, our ways, our sacred responsibilities. Maria's weathered face was kind but firm. Tell me, child, in all your education, have you learned nothing about balance? I've tried to find balance. But how do you balance submission with self-respect? By understanding that strength sometimes looks like yielding, and yielding sometimes requires great strength. Maria turned to include Jake in her gaze. Mr. Morrison, you have shown kindness to one of our daughters, but kindness without understanding can become harm. Jake nodded respectfully. I'm trying to understand, ma'am. But from where I sit, it looks like Aiyana is being punished for wanting an education and the right to choose her own husband. And from where we sit, Maria replied gently, it looks like she's choosing individual desires over family obligations, modern ideas over ancient wisdom, uncertainty over security. A younger Navajo woman stepped forward, perhaps 25, with shorter hair and clothing that blended traditional and contemporary styles. Mrs. Tso, what if the ancient wisdom includes women's voices? What if our traditions are strong enough to evolve? Several older men frowned at this interruption, but Maria studied the speaker thoughtfully. Sarah Yazzie, you work for the Tribal Education Department, don't you? Yes, ma'am. And I see young women every day who are hungry for knowledge but afraid to pursue it because they'll be seen as betraying their culture. The crowd stirred uneasily as the generational divide became more apparent. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Maria Tso called for a formal circle. The disparate groups slowly arranged themselves according to traditional protocols. Elders in the center, family members by relationship, community members by clan affiliation. Jake found himself uncomfortably in the spotlight as the only non-Navajo present, but Henry Yazzie gestured for him to remain. This matter concerns more than just our community, Henry explained. Mr. Morrison has become part of this story. Maria stood in the circle's center, her voice carrying clearly in the desert air. We are here because one of our daughters stands at a crossroads. But I believe we are all at a crossroads between the ways that have sustained us and the changes that surround us. She turned to Thomas. Thomas Begay, you are a good man who honors our traditions. Speak your heart. Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady but passionate. Our people have survived because we maintain sacred balances between earth and sky, between individual and community, between men and women. When these balances are disturbed, everything suffers. Marriage is not about personal happiness. It's about continuing our people, our ways, our connection to the sacred. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the older members. Maria nodded, then looked at Aiyana. Child, speak your heart. Aiyana's voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. I honor our traditions, our people, our sacred connections. But I believe our traditions are strong enough to include women who use their minds as well as their hearts. My grandmother taught me that we survive by adapting, by learning, by growing. If I can't be both Navajo and educated, both connected to my people and true to my own spirit, then we're telling our daughters they must choose between their heritage and their potential. Sarah Yazzie stepped forward without permission, her voice clear. Mrs. Tso, I speak for the young women who are watching this decision. We need to know, are we Navajo enough to think for ourselves? The circle stirred uneasily. This was pushing boundaries of protocol and tradition. Maria raised her hand for silence, her expression thoughtful. Jake Morrison, you have heard our words. What do you see? Jake felt every eye upon him. I see people who love Aiyana trying to do what they think is best for her. I also see that love can sometimes look like control, and tradition can sometimes be used to avoid difficult changes. He paused. Where I come from, we believe people should be free to make their own choices. But I'm learning that freedom without connection to something larger than yourself can be pretty empty. He looked directly at Aiyana. Maybe the answer isn't choosing between individual freedom and community responsibility. Maybe it's finding ways to honor both. And how would you do that? Thomas challenged. Jake took a deep breath. What if Aiyana finished her education and came back to teach Navajo children? What if she married someone who supported her goals instead of someone who wanted to limit them? What if your community found ways to value educated women instead of fearing them? The circle fell silent as people absorbed the suggestion. 3 months later, Jake stood on his porch watching the sunrise paint the Arizona desert in familiar shades of gold and red. The landscape looked the same, but everything had changed. His garden flourished under Aiyana's careful tending, producing vegetables he'd never imagined could grow in such harsh soil. More importantly, his ranch had become an unexpected meeting place where traditional Navajo knowledge and modern agricultural techniques created something entirely new. Aiyana emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving with a quiet grace that had captivated him from their first meeting. Her engagement ring, a simple band of silver and turquoise that honored both their cultures, caught the morning light. The delegation from the Tribal Education Committee will be here at 10, she said, settling beside him on the porch swing he'd recently installed. Nervous? Jake asked, though he knew she wasn't. Over the past months, he'd watched her confidence bloom as she found ways to bridge the gap between her 2 worlds. Excited, Aiyana corrected. The pilot program could change everything. Navajo students learning traditional ecological knowledge alongside modern agricultural science, using both to solve real problems on the reservation. The compromise reached that dramatic day 3 months ago hadn't been perfect, but it had been workable. Aiyana would complete her education while maintaining strong connections to her community. Thomas, after much reflection, had graciously stepped aside, acknowledging that forcing marriage would benefit no one. Most surprisingly, several tribal elders had begun questioning whether their traditions truly required limiting women's roles, or whether they confused cultural preservation with resistance to change. Your grandmother would be proud, Jake said, watching a roadrunner dart between the saguaro cacti. She'd probably say this was her plan all along, Aiyana laughed. She used to tell me that the spirits sometimes arrange accidents that aren't really accidents. Speaking of arrangements, Jake said, producing a folded paper from his shirt pocket, got a letter from the Bureau of Indian Affairs yesterday. They're interested in expanding the program statewide if our pilot succeeds. Aiyana's eyes widened as she read. Jake, this will affect thousands of students, dozens of communities. We could really make a difference. We already have, he said, gesturing toward a garden where traditional Three Sisters planting, corn, beans, and squash grew alongside experimental drought-resistant varieties. Your uncle stopped by yesterday while you were in town. He's thinking about sending his daughter to college. Sarah Yazzy's influence, Aiyana smiled. She's been working with families across the reservation, showing them that education can strengthen cultural identity instead of threatening it. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, the tribal delegation arriving early, eager to see the innovative agricultural program that had grown from a young woman's desperate flight from unwanted marriage. No regrets? Jake asked, taking her hand. Aiyana considered the question seriously, as she considered everything. I lost the life I thought I had to live, but I found the life I was meant to live. She squeezed his fingers. Besides, someone had to teach this stubborn rancher that there's more than one way to make the desert bloom. As the vehicles approached, carrying educators and tribal leaders ready to explore new possibilities, Jake reflected on how dramatically his world had expanded. He'd offered shelter to a wounded stranger and discovered that sometimes helping someone else find their path illuminates your own. The Arizona sun climbed higher, promising another day of scorching heat and limitless possibility.